Welcome to Ron Tape. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at No Escape, the intense thriller that will have you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Starring Owen Wilson as Jack Dwyer, an American businessman who finds himself caught in the middle of a violent political uprising in Southeast Asia, this film will keep you on the edge of your seat with its heart-pounding action and suspenseful twists. Get ready for a wild ride as we recap all the best moments of No Escape. Set in 2022, the film portrays the privatization of the international prison system where correctional facilities have turned into profit-making enterprises. In a flashback scene, a group of soldiers is seen marching when John Robbins, one of them, shoots his superior officer. The reason being the latter's past order to kill innocent civilians in Benghazi. After committing a criminal act, John Robbins has been sentenced to life imprisonment. Due to his previous successful escapes from 2 Level 5 maximum security prisons, he is now being transferred to Leviticus, a high-tech Level 6 prison. As he is transported to the new facility, he travels on a sleek monorail that rises above the surrounding desert like a futuristic metropolis. Upon their arrival at the prison, the inmates are greeted by the warden who declares that their chances of escape are non-existent, and that death is the sole means of leaving. Shortly thereafter, prisoner number 2675, John Robbins, is summoned by the warden, who discloses that Robbins had been found guilty of killing his commanding officer and had previously escaped from a Level 5 correctional facility. Shortly after, he is tossed into a cell where he meets a fellow inmate who shares some food with him. The prisoner also reveals details about Absalom, a notorious prison island reserved for the most dangerous criminals in the world, which is feared by all who know of it. During the night, Robbins wakes up to find that his fellow prisoner has disappeared. Shortly after, he is taken to the torture chamber where a large crowd of inmates is gathered, and he sees his partner tied up. The warden orders Robbins to electrocute his companion as punishment for smuggling food into the prison. Despite the warden's insistence, Robbins declines and lets go of the electric zapper. To coerce Robbins, the warden aims his gun at Robbins' partner and gives him an ultimatum to retrieve the zapper in 5 seconds. After a series of events, Robbins takes hold of the warden's firearm and points it back at him. Nevertheless, he quickly relinquishes control, and the guards respond by subjecting Robbins to a severe beating. Having deemed Robbins a danger, the warden opts to banish him to the remote jungle island of Absalom. In the subsequent sequence, we witness Robbins being airlifted to the island via helicopter. Upon the warden's arrival on the island, he commands for Robbins to be thrown into Sector 4 of the notorious Absalom prison. This section is under the control of a faction of inmates called the Outsiders. As he is being hurled from the helicopter, Robbins senses ominous sounds drawing near. Swiftly, he races towards the jungle in an attempt to evade whatever peril approaches. However, the savage outsiders, governed by a ruthless sociopath named Walter Merrick and his law of the jungle, quickly apprehend him. Restrained and escorted, Robbins is taken into the outsiders' encampment. It looks like a deserted island resort, with run-down houses and an empty swimming pool. The outsiders strip Robbins of his clothes and possessions, but Walter Merrick intervenes and demands they return them. Soon, Robbins is taken to a pit where Merrick forces him to engage in a deadly fight with one of his men for amusement. However, with minimal effort, Robbins dispatches his opponent in mere seconds. After discovering Robbins' impressive abilities, Merrick is impressed and extends an offer for a high-ranking position in his gang. However, Robbins responds by pushing Merrick into the pool, taking his rocket launcher, and fleeing the outsiders' camp. The next scene shows Merrick and his gang scouring the jungle for Robbins. They eventually locate him and trap him at the edge of a cliff. One of the gang members shoots Robbins in the neck with a blowgun dart, causing him to tumble into the river below. On the island, a group of prisoners called the Insiders, led by a doctor with a terminal illness and a wise dictator known as Father, find Robbins in the river and rescue him. Later, the warden discovers that the Insiders have kidnapped Robbins. Robbins regains consciousness and ventures outside to explore the Insiders' camp. He's astonished to see various amenities of civilization such as communal showers, blacksmith shops, and even a small distillery. The insiders make their clothes using small looms and seem to be considering taking up pottery. Furthermore, the insider gang formed an independent cooperative community with regulations that defy the tyrannical rule of the outsiders. Not long after that, John Robbins comes across a man known as Father, who tells him about the insiders' camp and its gang. Father then introduces Robbins to Hawkins, the leader of the insider gang's security. Robbins shares his story of escaping from the outsiders, which leaves a positive impression on Father. Shortly thereafter, Robbins realizes that he is the only survivor of Marek's outsiders' camp and that the insiders are greatly outnumbered. He is informed by Father that the rocket launcher he had taken from Marek has now been acquired for the betterment of the community. After Father recognizes Robbins' talents, he offers him a spot with the insiders. Robbins declines, however, and expresses his desire to leave the island. Father then instructs Hawkins to escort Robbins to Dysart, the gang's only engineer, who is shown examining the rocket launcher that Robbins had stolen from Marek. Dysart and Hawkins take Robbins to one of the camp's outposts and reveal that they are situated 200 miles away from the mainland. They also disclose that gunships patrol 50 miles off the coast, and infrared satellite technology monitors thermal activity, including large fires and explosions. Finally, they explain that escaping the island without being detected is an impossible feat. In the next sequence, Robbins encounters Tom King, a new helper who instructs him on hygiene and related matters. Later that same evening, Robbins is seen strolling when he realizes that he is being trailed. As it turns out, the person following him is Casey, a gullible young man who was sentenced to life imprisonment for kidnapping that resulted in double felony murder after the hostages died accidentally. Casey is impressed by Robbins' successful escape from Marek prison and seeks to befriend him, but Robbins declines and asks him to stop following him. Hawkins observes Robbins leaving the insiders' camp and heading towards a cliff near the sea. Upon reaching the cliff, Robbins sits down and gazes out at the ocean. As he looks out, he sees a dynamic graphic of a small, gray escape pod resembling a slug moving through the water before exploding. Shortly thereafter, Casey arrives after trailing Robbins. Following a conversation about their past experiences and life on the island, Robbins and Casey become friends. Casey introduces Robbins to X, who offers him merchandise in exchange for his boots. However, Robbins declines the offer and instead inquires about X's boat. During the night, Robbins becomes suspicious of the insider gang and decides to track them into the jungle. However, his mission is unsuccessful as he is caught by Hawkins and brought back to the camp. The next morning, Robbins and Casey share a meal together, and during their conversation, Robbins learns more about Casey. They suddenly spot a supply helicopter in the sky, but Casey informs Robbins that it's intended only for outsiders, leaving insiders without any supplies. Sometime later, Casey introduces Robbins to Killian, another member of the insider gang, who offers him a homemade drink. A bell rings at the insiders' camp, prompting them to rush towards the gate. The gang's leader, the King, is seen banishing a member who failed to fulfill his duties properly. Witnessing this, Robbins appears to be challenging the King's authority over the insiders. Meanwhile, the outsiders' gang is having a heated argument with their leader Marek about the food delivery they received earlier. After Marek kills a gang member, the insiders celebrate Christmas that same night. Marek's crew launches a surprise attack on the insider camp and sets it ablaze with flaming arrows, though the next day reveals curiously little fire damage. Both factions engage in a brutal brawl. The father hides in his room, but Marek spots him and takes him captive. Just before Marek can kill the father, Robbins intervenes and saves the father. Marek escapes with his gang. Robbins is informed by the father that such attacks happen 4 to 5 times annually. Later, Killian converses with Robbins, revealing that the warden wants both insiders and outsiders to fight and die in battle. The next morning, Robbins rushes to the cliff near the sea and spots the father, Hawkins, and Dysart observing a departing boat. He soon discovers that the insiders have constructed a scan-proof boat in secret and used it to inform the outside world about Absalom. Unfortunately, the boat is detected and destroyed by attack helicopters, leading the father to suspect the presence of an informant among them. In the subsequent scene, Robbins reaches Dysart's residence. He remains resolute in his desire to escape and finds a new boat, demanding passage on it. However, when he learns that the engine requires a distributor, a part he had seen at Marek's camp, he proposes to retrieve it in exchange for passage for himself and his friend Casey. The insiders agree to his plan. Although Casey wants to accompany Robbins to Marek's camp, Robbins declines his request. In the next sequence, Robbins makes his way towards the outsiders. Though he denies any association, Casey still chases after him but is caught soon after. Meanwhile, Robbins infiltrates the outsiders' camp and obtains the engine part. He then creates a diversion within the camp and rescues Casey, who had been taken captive by the outsiders. However, as Robbins and Casey attempt to escape, they are apprehended by Merrick, the leader of the outsiders' gang. Merrick throws Robbins into the pool and compels him to fight Casey until death. However, Casey impales himself on Robbins' weapon, aware that only one can escape. Later, Merrick prepares to execute Robbins, but he is saved by an undercover insider, much to Marek's frustration. In the next scene, Robbins hands the distributor to Dysart, while at Father's house, the group learns of Marek's assault and the father's worsening condition. Following this, the insider gang formulates a plan to safeguard Merrick. Though outnumbered, Robbins manages to persuade the insiders to abandon their camp, which they booby-trap before departing. Hawkins reveals to Robbins that he had spent 13 years constructing the place and cannot simply leave it behind. Robbins then decides to stay behind, using the stolen rocket launcher to detonate an incendiary bomb. The following day, it becomes apparent that everyone at the insiders' camp has vacated the area. Robbins seeks out the father and discovers that he is terminally ill. The father requests that Robbins assume his position after he passes away, but Robbins declines and declares his plan to escape the island. The following day, Merrick and his outsider gang reach the insiders' camp only to find it deserted. Meanwhile, Robbins lies in wait for them, armed with a rocket launcher. When Merrick approaches with the intention of taking him down, Robbins fires the rocket, resulting in the death of all the outsiders except their leader, Merrick. Upon returning to the prison, the warden becomes suspicious of abnormal activities taking place on the island. Consequently, he commands his men to prepare a helicopter for an urgent flight to the island. Meanwhile, the remaining outsiders flee from the insiders' base. Unfortunately, Merrick remains alive and unscathed within the insiders' camp. In the next sequence, the father visits Robbins, and Merrick suddenly appears and tries to kill him. One thing leads to another, and the father tragically loses his life while defending Robbins from Merrick. After a fierce struggle, Robbins finally defeats Merrick. However, his joy is short-lived as he soon discovers the new boat incinerated, along with evidence implicating the king in Dysart's murder. Meanwhile, the warden's journey to the island can be observed. In due course, Robbins uncovers the truth that the king is a traitor. He compels the king to provide new landing coordinates to the warden for his helicopter. Upon the helicopter's arrival, Robbins and his team seize control, slaying the guards and ousting the warden. The king and warden are stranded as unknown outsiders approach them. The film concludes with a scene showing Robbins fleeing the island in a helicopter.